As an entrepreneur, I think one has to be at the intersection of a lot of skills and abilities, whether they be hard skills or soft skills, anything. Is there one skill that you think is very important for them to have, and what would you call it, and how would you kind of, if I were to ask you to take a short masterclass on that, can we do that right now?
Sure, absolutely. Presentation and creating a killer presentation is one of the most important skills an entrepreneur can have. And unfortunately, this is not taught anywhere. You're taught to code, you're taught to do, maybe marketing, you're taught a lot of things. Even product management is taught today, but you're not taught how to present. And creating a killer deck, killer PowerPoint is one of the most important skills you can have in your life. And this can translate across multiple domains. So I would sort of categorize presentations into sort of 5 broad buckets. Number 1, you're selling something. Number 2, you're conveying some information, right? This is just like, here is a presentation. I'm going to inform you. By the end of the presentation, you are more informed than the beginning. Number 3, you can present to set up a brainstorm, right? It's an internal team or a larger team where you want to put some ideas, provoke some thought, and have a discussion. Number 4, which is a variation of number 2, is you're teaching something, right? You want somebody to genuinely learn something that they do not know. And the last type of presentation is a consensus building and arriving at a decision. This is typically what happens in a corporation, where you sort of, you want to drive to a particular direction. You have a bunch of stakeholders who might or might not be fully aligned. You want to build a consensus. At the end of the presentation, you guys arrive at a decision. So I'm not going to talk about in 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm only going to talk about how to sell something. Okay?
Wow, okay.
Because I feel like that's probably what is relevant for this audience, who are all startups. You're pitching to either an investor or to a customer, right? And you're selling something. And believe me, it's like super important. So, so if I were to focus on sort of the number 1, the first thing I would do, and this is 99% of the people I've seen present, and I've been through probably tens of thousands of presentations, is that they don't do the basics. Okay, and this is very easy to do. So number 1 thing I would suggest everybody to do is to do the stage management, right? So first of all, you need to set up, right? Setting up, understanding the time, like how long do you have for the presentation? This is very basic stuff, right? You should need to do research on the audience. So Nivedan, before you came in, you did research on me, right? You knew I traveled, I speak languages, I have been to so many countries, so on and so forth. And that's a super important thing to do, right? It's not very hard. It takes like 10 minutes to go on Google or LinkedIn and find out all this information. And almost anybody who you present to probably has a footprint. And there is absolutely no excuse to not do that. And when you do that, you can immediately connect with the audience, right? So you can set up a bond. And that is like a super important and necessary skill. The other thing to know, as I said, is the timing constraint. So you need to know how long you're presenting for, how long is it there. You need to make sure the decision maker is there in the room or not there in the room. Like, who's the big dog in the room, or 1 or 2 big dogs. And these are all information that is there. If you look for presenting to a venture capitalist, you need to know if the partner is there or not. If the partner is not there, who is the most senior person in the room, right? And of course, all of this is there, and then later on you have to adjust in real time, because whatever you go prepare for before, it's not going to go according to plan. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So this is sort of the pre-work in my mind.
So step 1 is know your audience really well.
Know your audience really well, understand the timing, understand the room you're in, go to the room like 10 minutes before if you can, right? You can almost, if the room is empty, you can almost talk the assistant into like letting you set up, right? Before the person walks in, right? Because people walk in and they spend the first 10 minutes setting up, right? PowerPoint doesn't work, Wi-Fi password is not there. It's some very basic stuff, right? Zoom is not working, right? Understand like what you're setting up for, and don't waste the time of everybody in the room in doing all of that. So, like, for example, I spend a lot of time figuring out where to sit in the meeting, right? Where am I sitting? Where are my co-founders sitting? Where are my partners sitting? Where is the other person sitting? Is it a small table? Is it a big table, right? Because the dynamics of a big table is somebody else remotely going to join, for example. And a lot of times we're presenting on a stage and somebody remotely is joining. And if you're sitting if there's a camera there, which is usually attached to the TV, if you're sitting at the end of the room, they can't see you, right? And usually that person might be a decision maker, right? So anyway, so just put some thought into all of this, right? And make sure you can do this. And this is very easy to do. This is true for all types of presentation, by the way, right? Just present yourself well. So this is before even the content I'm talking about. So then quickly going to the content, and focusing on the number one. So there are two broad themes of presentation. Okay, there are two types of presentation. One is basically what is called a narrative arc, right? So it's like a detective story, and you're bringing the audience along with you in a sort of a it's like a deductive story where the reasoning is deductive. Okay, you're laying the clues, and then you're going to come to the end with a conclusion. And the second one is by induction, right? So this is like not a detection, not deduction, but induction. So where you kill the suspense and you sort of present everything up front. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these. So in the narrative arc is a very typical story. Almost all TED Talks are like this, right? And most novels are written in this style. So it usually starts with a crisis. I had cancer, right? Or something, right? I was in the middle of a mountain and, I didn't know how to get down, right? Number of stories like that. There's a conflict, there's a problem. And by the end of the presentation, the crisis is resolved. Right? That's how you bring the audience along. You start with the crisis and then you lead the audience along. And what I would not talk about, I'm not going to go double click on this one. Go look at TED Talks, read the book by Steve. So there are a bunch of books on this which tell you how to do that. What might be relevant to this audience is actually the number two type of presentation, right? So here, the assumption is that your audience has ADD, right? And they will mostly make a judgment. They don't have any patience. And this is true for all investors, I can tell you that. Is that they will make a judgment in like the first 2 minutes. Okay.
Wow.
You will not have any investor make a judgment beyond slide number 3. Okay.
Wow.
So if you start laying out the market size, the TAM, the problem statement, why current solutions don't cut it, your solution, how the problem is solved, that will be the narrative arc, right?
That's the typical one that we do, and that's not good.
That is correct. That is the wrong way to do it, even though it sounds very logical, right? So it's because you're describing the market, how big the market, overall landscape, right? India is blah, blah, blah. This is growing, e-commerce is growing, social commerce is growing, right? Now, but there is a problem. The current solution, that guy doesn't solve it. Amazon cannot solve it. Flipkart cannot solve it. Your solution is like the greatest in the world. And now how you're solving this, then you show the proof of how the solution works, right? And then how you're going to become $100 million of revenue and you're going to become a unicorn, right? That's kind of like a normal way to do it, but it's the wrong way to do it. And the reason is that assumes that the other audience subscribe to the deductive thinking process. That's a detective story. What most people do is they don't do that, like think like that. Okay, so they actually form a conclusion up front. And then the rest of the story is about confirmation bias. Right? So what you need to do is that you put out one slider, maximum 2, which tells them everything. Okay. So there's a little bit of the problem statement, but in one slide, right? Solution, the traction, right? And one liner on your glorious future. Then you go through the details. And now you double click, right? But the traction is usually the most important part. Like even if it's a little bit, right? I've gotten 1,000 customers in 10 days, right? Whatever that be, right? If you have more longer track record, some sharp curve going up to the right? That shows that your solution works.
So solution, traction, and then?
So basically in a 1 or 2 slides, you talk about everything, right? You talk about, briefly touch on the problem, because the truth is that every investor, right, and if you're even for a customer, knows what the problem is, correct? You're unlikely that you're inventing a problem that they do not know about.
Got it.
Okay, and if you are doing that, that's a much harder sell, by the way, right? If you're telling them a problem that actually they have no idea about, right? That's like that's almost like an uninvestable business, because nobody will want to take that kind of risk. Right? So if it's a customer, obviously they know the problem because they're the customer, right? That's why you're in the meeting. If they're a investor, they've seen like 1,000 presentations like you before, right? So they broadly know if you're doing e-commerce, if you're doing whatever you're doing, some SaaS product, whatever you're doing, they know the problem. Okay? So you don't need to tell them to repeat the problem, right? You can quickly tell them what your solution is, because they also seen solution, because you are the 10th guy, right? Even in your own narrow domain, who's pitching this your pitch. So they've seen 5 other solutions, they've not seen yours, right? So all you need to do is, because they are very smart and impatient people, right? So all you need to do is tease them a little bit, right? You just show a little bit of leg, right? and little bit of things. I want to come to that. I want to go into details, right? And then quickly say this is working, right? Because that is very hard to argue, right? It's working, right? That's how you bias people, saying that this guy's got something that works. Yes, I've seen this problem before. Looks like they have an innovative solution, which I might or might not believe in, but somebody's believing in it and buying it or using it. Correct?
Now they can move on beyond their initial perception and judgment.
That is correct. So now they have a framework to work with. Now they're curious. It's very counterintuitive what I'm saying. But almost if you think about it, we all are highly opinionated. We all have an opinion, right? Even you can if I can throw a brand new anything at you, right? You will probably have some preconceived notion of this good, bad, like it, don't like it, right? Very early on. So number 2 is highly desired, even though it's very counterintuitive. I will not go into the details of the third part, which is the actual presentation creation. There's a lot of content out there, and again, you can ping me separately because this is kind of my passion area. But I'll just tell you a few do not do's in the interest of time. Do not be wordy, right? Do not expect a presentation, an audience to read off your slides. Full grammatical sentences are not required. Do not have ugly visuals, right? Spend the time, don't do boxy, ugly graphics. They really distract. And don't be long, right? So 1 hour meetings means 5 minutes for chit chat or setup, not more than 25 to 30 minutes for the presentation. And that means maximum of 12 to 15 slides, never more than 20 slides, even if they're very light, and leave time for Q&A. The rookie mistake is to keep talking till minute 59, right? Just because you have a lot to say, right? Just to quickly conclude, Nivedan, so the last part is handling the googlies, right? Like I said, right, like Mike Tyson said, right? Everybody has got a plan before they walk into the ring and
they
get
punched in the face,
right? It happens every time. I've never been on my 30 years. I've done zillion presentations, right? I usually prepare, as you can tell, right? I prepare, I do my audience research, blah, 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 right? I walk into the meeting, right? So there are 2 or 3 types of common problems that you have. One is people keep asking questions, right? They interrupt your flow, right? So you have a plan and they're asking what you're going to show in the slide number 6, right? What do? You can't jump to slide 6 because, it's going to kill your flow, right? They're the kind of senior people, so you can't tell them I'll tell you later, right? And what is really bad is some show-offs, right? So typically in a good meeting, there'll be some senior partners and senior people, the CEO of the company, they're doing a sales pitch, and then there is a junior guy. And the junior person, his objective or her objective is to show off to her boss or his boss, right? So they are using you, right? Whatever, TAM is low. What about this competition? It's always the standard worst question you can get. And your competition is doing much better than you. It's been done before. What's the big deal? Because competition question always puts you on the defense. There is no way to answer a question, right? Without either putting down your competition and making you look like you're, sort of
so
arrogant.
Is there a code to crack these kinds of googlies?
Let me come to that. So it's tricky. The other type of googly is people who are distracted, right? The senior person suddenly gets a call. You're in the middle of your best slide, right? And the person is getting a call. What do you do, right? Other people are there. You can continue, you can stop, right? So, and there are other ones, for example, you prepared for your demo, it never works. The demos usually don't work, right? Right at that time, 70% of demos don't work or don't work according to plan. So, these are some of the googlies. They're normal. So what is important is to not get flustered. And usually the other people also know, right? Especially there are good people on the other side of the team. They understand. They're far more forgiving than you are. So if you get flustered and sort of miss, whatever you need to say, then you're only shooting yourself in the foot. So you can be a little bit more forgiving, and you can. So for the demos, for example, I usually joke about it. Make a joke. I think demos never work, right? I'll send you a link later on. But these days, what I actually do is to do a pre-prepared video. Right? I create a set of screenshots or without a voice, right? And I talk to it. So this is almost always work because now you are controlling the environment. So unless you're super sure about your demo, don't show a demo. Distracted people in the meeting is a tricky one, right? If it's obviously a junior person, you can just ignore and move on. If it's a senior person, if they're kind of just looking at their phone or something, you can kind of just pause a little bit, right? It's a little bit of showmanship, right? And you can just pull them back into the meeting. But if they stand up and walk out of the meeting, and they'll usually say continue, right? So you have no option but to continue. But what you can do is to if they walk back into the meeting, you say, hey, Rohit, I'm sorry you missed this. I just want to show you this one slide, right? Because you're kind of on slide 20 now. right? But you really think that there's the one killer site that person needs to see to get the full context, right? It's a terrible thing to do, right? When that happens, but shit happens, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, these are some of the ways to sort of deal with this. In the interest of time, I'm going to pause here. Obviously, there is a lot more to it, but this is sort of the nitty gritty of presentations.